Yeah, so good morning and welcome to Classical Mechanics 1. Today's Thursday, 11th of November is the 14th meeting. Um, uh, please bear with me if there is some glitches in the connection because of the heavy rain. I'm not able to go to the office and there is no power here, but somehow electricity board knows that we have a class now. So the power came on just a few minutes ago. So I hope it stays that way. So I hope you can hear me and um, okay. So last time we were speaking about conservative forces and their associated energy, the work that a force does, as well as the energy that one can, and the fact that the work done does not depend on the trajectory as a whole, but only on the endpoints, if the force is conservative. So let me just share my screen.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I had that doubt from the previous class.
Okay.
So in the previous class, we discussed about the law of equivalence, which deals with the relationship between the gravitational mass and the inertial mass. So
Yes.
in that, we somehow came to the conclusion that the ratio mg over mi is constant for every point object.
Yeah,
like,
for bodies, it's the same ratio for different bodies. Yes.
So how did we like concluded that this ratio is equal to 1?
No, this ratio is some constant. What we did is that we have redefined the gravitational constant G that appears in Newton's law. This thing here, so that we absorb, see, suppose the ratio is not equal to 1 and it's equal to 2.34 or something, then we will absorb that, we will multiply this G by 2.34 and so that that constant will go away. and that is, we are choosing some kind of unit in that sense, so that then that ratio can be taken as 1. Is that understandable?
Yeah, so that ratio is somehow dependent on the capital G. That's why when we are varying the capital G, it's like.
Yeah, I mean, capital G is just a constant. So we are redefining that constant so that this ratio is equal to 1. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sure. Any other question from last time? If not, we will continue our discussion of conservation of energy for a conservative force. So let me recall where we were last time. Yeah, so what we said last time is that many interesting forces, such as gravity and electrostatic force, the electrostatic force, as well as the restoring force in a spring, but not friction, are conservative in the sense that those forces are given by the derivative of some potential. More precisely, they are the gradient of a potential, or for conventional purposes, minus the gradient of a potential. And for such conservative forces, Newton's second law can be rewritten as mr double dot is equal to minus grad V. Okay. Yeah. So 1 second. How do I just need to make Vishnu a co-host. Yeah. I hope that has worked. Yeah. Okay, so for such forces, Newton's second law becomes mr double dot is equal to minus grad v. Yeah, and now we will see, we showed last time that this implies that the sum of so-called kinetic and potential energies, that is half m r dot squared plus v of r, is conserved along trajectories. So I think people are still joining us. We have 47 participants. Anyway, I'm still revising things from last time. Yeah, so yeah, so we showed that this is the case by computing the time derivative of energy. If you have the square of velocity and you take its derivative, you get the 2 cancels this 2 in the denominator, and you get mr dot dotted with r double dot. Yeah, we wrote that out in components to check last time. And then if you differentiate the potential with respect to time, you must first differentiate the potential with respect to position and then position with respect to time, because V depends on time only through R. Yeah, so this is the use of the chain rule. And the R dot is then a common factor here. We take it out and then put a dot product over here, which I have omitted. And then collect the remaining terms mr double dot plus grad v equal to, and this is equal to 0 because the equation of motion, which we just wrote, tells you that the term in parentheses is 0. Okay, so we have shown that the energy defined in this manner is conserved, and we have used the equation of motion to do so. So that's why we say it is valid for a trajectory and not any old curve. Yeah, so we have used Newton's equation of motion, which means that we have shown that energy is constant along a trajectory, assuming the force is conservative. And just to clarify, a curve qualifies as a trajectory if it satisfies the equation of motion, mr double dot equal to force. Otherwise, we will not call it a trajectory. So as a matter of terminology, we say that the energy is a conserved quantity or a constant of motion if the forces are conservative. Yeah, and that's part of the reason for the name conservative, because it leads to conserved energy. Okay, so yeah, now one small rewriting. We know that the velocity can be rewritten in terms of the momentum, yeah, simply by dividing by mass. And therefore, you can rewrite half mv squared as p squared upon 2m. Yeah, I think. So half m r dot squared becomes half m. For r dot, I will write p upon m whole squared. When I say square, I really mean the dot product of p with p. That's what I mean. Yeah, so this becomes p vector dot squared divided by 2m. So the energy can also be expressed in terms of momentum rather than velocity, plus the potential energy, of course. And written in this way, when energy is regarded as a function of momentum and position rather than velocity and position, it is sometimes called the Hamiltonian. Okay, this has a deeper significance, which we will talk about later on, hopefully. But for now, it is just another name for energy when written in terms of momentum rather than velocity. Now, towards the end of last lecture, it was asked, where did this formula for half mr dot squared come from?
Sir, could you repeat what a Hamiltonian is, please?
Yeah, so at this stage, for us, the Hamiltonian is simply the energy of a conservative system when expressed in terms of momentum and position rather than velocity and position. That's all. We have eliminated r dot in terms of p using the definition of momentum. That's all we did. Yeah. So for us, Hamiltonian is just a name for the energy when written in terms of momentum rather than velocity. Is that understood?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that was Siddhant. Yeah. Okay. Now, there are other ways of obtaining this conserved energy. which don't amount to very much. It's the same calculation done in a slightly different way. Yeah, but it does introduce some nice ideas. So let me say what that is. One can obtain this conserved energy by integrating Newton's equation of motion once using what is called an integrating factor. Okay. So this is a general method in the theory of differential equations, where if you want to integrate an equation, it may be possible to multiply it or do something. I mean, usually it's multiplied by something, some quantity, so that the resulting expression can be seen to be the derivative of something else, and then it allows you to integrate it once. So, so in fact, this was the question asked by Bijayan Rai, who has just joined us. So this is the idea of an integrating factor. Let me go through it. So let's do it in one dimension. Consider motion on a line, maybe for system with 1 degree of freedom. Yeah, so I know that the idea of degrees of freedom may not be fully understood by many of you, but a motion on a line, a particle moving on a line, has 1 degree of freedom. Yeah, you need to specify only one coordinate, namely one real number, which you could call x, to specify the initial location of the particle. Okay, so that is what it means to have 1 degree of freedom. How many real parameters do you need to specify the initial location? I do not include things like the mass as a free parameter, because the mass is fixed. I mean, that is not part of the initial conditions or specification of the location of the particle. The mass is a separate parameter that is specified. Okay, so once again, consider motion on a line, 1 degree of freedom. Now for a conservative force, which I will write as F is equal to minus V prime of X, one-dimensional motion. So gradients and all become simply ordinary primes, derivative. Newton's equation, second law, becomes mx double dot is equal to the force, or putting F equal to minus V prime, we get mx double dot plus V prime of X equal to 0. Okay. So this is our differential equation. V is a specified function. Okay. Just like you have specified the force, the V is also a specified function. Yeah. Now, multiplying this equation by the so-called integrating factor. Now, where did this integrating factor come from? Well, it comes from experience, inspiration, thought, friendly advice, and so on. Yeah, at some level, the origin of ideas is from. There is no deductive procedure. They come from luck and observation and experimentation and looking at things up and so on. Yeah, one does need to accept that many things in physics come from inspiration. There is no simple reason why somebody will multiply by x dot. It is you try it, if it works, you feel happy. If it doesn't work, you try something else. Yeah, so but with experience, you come to see what is a good thing to try. So, and you will see that in a moment here. So we take this equation, yeah, and multiply by x dot. Yeah, so you will get mx double dot times x dot plus v prime of x times x dot equal to 0. Yeah, but now we observe that this whole thing is now the derivative with respect to time of some quantity. Indeed, the left-hand side can be, the first term on the left can be regarded as the time derivative of half m x dot squared. Yeah, because if you differentiate that, you will get half m times 2x dot times x double dot. Okay, that's what it means to differentiate. The 2's cancel and you get this. Yeah, so it was in anticipation of this manipulation, this identity, that we multiplied by x dot. Because we noticed that x double dot is the derivative of x dot, so that when we differentiate x dot squared, we will get back this expression. Yeah, so so that is as far as the first term is concerned. The second term also is the time derivative of some quantity, namely v of x of t itself. Yeah, because again, by the chain rule, if you differentiate v of x of t with respect to time, You have to first differentiate with respect to position and then with respect to time. Yeah, so d by dt of v of x of t is v prime of x times x dot. Yeah, so we have now observed that the Newton's equation upon multiplication by the integrating factor given by velocity can be rewritten as the total time derivative. I mean, I shouldn't say total, it is just the time derivative of some expression. And therefore, that expression must be a constant. We will call that constant by the symbol E and name it energy. Yeah, then we have thereby discovered that the quantity half mx dot square plus v of x is conserved. Okay. So this is the idea of a integrating factor. It can be used in other problems. It's a very useful technique. But finding an integrating factor is up to the skill of the practitioner. So you have to figure out which integrating factor works for a particular equation, if at all. There's no guarantee. Okay, so this energy is interpreted as a sum of the kinetic energy, half mx dot squared, which accrues from the particle's motion, yeah, and the previously introduced potential energy, V of x. So it's the sum of these two. It's that sum that we define as the energy. Okay, so any question about how we sort of derived this energy? Okay, Akash Yadav asks me, Professor, it's V prime and not V, right? Have I made a mistake? Could you tell me in which?
Sir,
yeah.
In the equation 61, like
yes.
When you written d by dt of half mx dot square plus v of x of t.
Yes.
So there it should be v prime.
No, let me go over it again. This equation 61 is correct. Suppose you take d by dt of this v of x of t. Yeah, let's go through that.
Got it.
Okay, you are faster than me. Fine. Okay, so Akash Yadav has resolved his own question. I hope others are also satisfied. If not, please do ask me. Okay. So any question about how we derived this conserved energy? Okay. Now, what amounts to the same thing but said in more physical terms is called the work energy relation, and this is worthwhile. I emphasize that all these are the same things said in different ways, but let us do that. It does provide some insight, especially this one. And there is some nice physics over here. So we're going to give yet another way to think about this kinetic energy. And this is called the work kinetic energy relation. I would like to call it that. It is also called the work energy theorem by some authors. And it is the following. Interestingly, even if the force is not conservative, see, up to now we have been looking at a conservative force. Now we drop that assumption. Even if the force is not conservative and there is no potential function V, then the work done by the force while moving a particle along a trajectory, yeah, that's important, while moving along a trajectory can be expressed as the increase in kinetic energy half mv squared. Okay, so let us see why this is the case. I will repeat the statement again once we go through it. Yeah, so what is the setup? We suppose that R of t for t ranging between Ta and Tb is a trajectory of a particle. Okay, so we are given a trajectory of a particle between some initial location A and from final location B at some time Ta to some time Tb. It's directed this way. Yeah, at any instant of time, the location is given by R of t. Okay, so now let us compute the force, sorry, the work done by the force. So of course, all along the trajectory, there is some force acting. The force, of course, may vary with location. Yeah, so it might point this way, there, and so on. It might change. So let us now compute the work done. Recall that it is given by the integral of f dot dr, yeah, along the curve, along the trajectory, and writing dr as dr dt times dt, it is this integral over time from ta to tb. Now let us substitute for the force using Newton's second law. So this is where we are using the fact that it is a trajectory. Yeah, it is a trajectory. So that means the force is given by the rate of change of momentum times, and for dr dt, I will substitute velocity. Okay, so it's this dot product. Okay, now for P, I introduce m times v and put that here. So dp dt becomes d by dt of mv dotted with v. Okay, so now the dt's cancel out. The m is a constant which I pull out. So this just rearranging this, the work done becomes the integral of m v dot dv. Okay, v dot dv. And what I mean by this is this: it is m times vx dvx plus vy dvy plus vz dvz. Okay, so when I write a dot product, that is what is meant, this expression. Now, you will observe, of course, that this is m by 2 times d of vx squared plus d of vy squared plus d of vz squared. Okay, each of them. These are all what we call differentials. Yeah, d of vx squared is a differential or a one form. And so this is a differential or a one form. Yeah, so we have been able to, and combining these three terms as d of v squared, that is v dot v, we arrive at the expression for the work as the integral of half m d of v squared. Okay, so we are fortunately in the circumstance where we are integrating the derivative of something, and therefore by the fundamental theorem of calculus, the value of this integral is given by the difference of the integrands, so the antiderivative evaluated at the endpoints. So that is half m vb squared. So it's from a to b, of course. Half m vb squared minus half m va squared. Yeah. So of course this is va and vb. Yeah. So lo and behold, we have shown that the work done by any force, not necessarily conservative, right? We have not used any assumption that F is grad V and so on, or minus grad V. We have now shown that the work is equal to the difference between the kinetic energies of the particle at the final and initial locations. This result is called the work energy theorem or work energy principle. Yeah, I would prefer to call it the work kinetic energy principle, because it is really referring to kinetic energy, not potential energy. And there is no concept of potential energy because we are not even assumed the force to be conservative. So is it clear how we derived this formula? Please take a moment and tell me if you have any question about this. This holds for any force, not necessarily conservative. That's the important thing. And the answer is expressed in terms of kinetic energy. Yeah, so this is yet another way in which kinetic energy arises for you. It is related to what we did before. See, the business of multiplying by the r dot or velocity in our integrating factor is a lot like computing work, because work is the force times the displacement, the infinitesimal displacement. And if you differentiate with respect to time, you will get force times the velocity. And it is essentially the same calculation, but the interpretation now is somewhat different. Okay, any question about this? All right, now I would like to make a comment about this, which is of some significance. and is can lead to some confusion if not properly understood. Yeah. We have now derived two formulae for the work done. So let us contrast them. Let us contrast this formula, namely equation 62, the work kinetic energy principle, with the formula 58 for the work done by a conservative force. Yeah. And let me recall what 58 was. The work done by a conservative force, W of gamma, was expressed as the drop in potential energies, provided a potential function exists. Yeah. So we now have two expressions for the work, one for a conservative force and one for a general force. Yeah. Now you may legitimately ask, having seen this work kinetic energy relation, look, the work done only depends on the endpoints. What is this? I mean, we didn't assume it's conservative. Nevertheless, the work seems to depend only on A and B. Yeah, I mean, so this is the conundrum that one may face. So perhaps the work is always dependent only on the endpoints and not the whole trajectory. This is the question one poses. Yeah. So, okay, well, let me clarify what's happening here. If the force were conservative, then the work done depends only on the difference in potential energies at the endpoints of the trajectory. Okay, that is certainly true. Now, despite appearances, the right-hand side of 62, namely the work energy theorem, yeah, where we have made no assumption about the force being conservative, generally depends on the trajectory. Despite the appearances, it depends on the trajectory and not just the endpoints. That's because kinetic energy doesn't depend only on the endpoints, it depends on the velocities at the endpoints. Yeah, you need to know what the endpoints are and what the velocities there were. Yeah, so in fact, the kinetic energies at A and B depend on the velocities, or if you like, the momenta at A and B. Yeah, so to write down this work energy relationship, you need to know the velocities as well as the locations. Yeah, so that's the catch. It is not a function only of the endpoints. It's a function of the endpoints and the velocities at the endpoints. And as we noted in our discussion of Newton's second law, the specification of initial position and momentum, or initial position and velocity, is enough to determine the entire trajectory. Okay. So hiding inside this formula is information about the entire trajectory. Yeah, despite all the appearances of being difference of the endpoints, because the dependence on velocity is also appearing, in effect, the work energy theorem does not say that the work done depends only on the endpoints. It includes information about the trajectory. So this is a somewhat subtle point. I hope you are able to follow the remark made.
Could you just repeat the remark, like
Yeah.
the last part?
Yes. So the remark concerns a dialogue between two people. One person looks at this formula 62 and says, oh, wait a minute, the work only depends on A and B, which are the two ends of the trajectory. Yeah. But then that can't be true, right? Because we just argued earlier that the work done by a force would depend on the trajectory, the entire process, unless the force were conservative. So that was our earlier viewpoint. What has happened here? Now, another person answers as follows, saying, it is a bit hasty, it's a bit incorrect to say that the work done depends only on the endpoints from this formula, because endpoints are a pair of locations, that is position A and position B. According to the work energy theorem, the work done doesn't depend only on the locations, it depends on the velocities at those locations, right? So through those velocities, additional information has entered. Yeah. So the work energy theorem does not violate our idea that the work cannot depend purely on the endpoints. It has to depend on more. Here it is depending on more through the velocities. Okay. So that is my first part of the explanation. Is that part understandable, Siddhant?
Yes.
Yeah, I made a second remark that knowing a location, initial location, and a velocity together in general, in conjunction with Newton's second law, determine an entire trajectory. Okay? Because if it requires two initial conditions. So if you have specified the initial location and velocity, then in effect you have specified the whole trajectory. Yeah. So there, that is where it is hiding inside. This work actually depends on the whole trajectory. Okay. I see a nod, so I presume this. Okay. But if you can understand this, I think you are really understanding some important concept in basic Newtonian physics, which is very easy to miss. Yeah. Any additional questions on this? Okay. If not, yeah, I am very relieved that the power came back. I was quite concerned how we will manage without power. And I hope it stays this way. Since morning, there was no power, and 10 minutes before the class, the power came back. Okay. Okay, so now let us proceed to another concept. So far we talked about linear momentum. We talked about potential in the case of a conservative system, and we talked about work. We talked about energy, kinetic energy, potential energy. Continuing, I want to introduce one more concept, namely angular momentum. Not something you are unaware of, but let us just state a few properties of it and introduce it. Now, the angular momentum, and I must always say the angular momentum about a chosen origin, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So angular momentum is always defined relative to a chosen origin. And if it is not specified, then somewhere within the discussion that origin is buried. We need to be aware of it. Yeah. So the angular momentum about a chosen origin of a particle moving in three-dimensional space. Yeah. So when I say moving in three-dimensional space, that particle would have 3 degrees of freedom. And that three-dimensional space could be this room. Yeah, it could be the space outside, etc. Of course, we don't want to be outside here. It is raining so much. So yeah, okay. Then we define that angular momentum as L equal to R cross P, where R is the position vector of the particle from the chosen origin. So it is very important. I keep emphasizing there is a chosen origin, there is an instantaneous location of the particle, and there is a instantaneous momentum as well. And it is the cross product R cross P, which we define as the angular momentum. So in this case, R cross P, does it point into the plane of the paper or out of the plane of the paper? Could you tell me that?
Into the plane?
You are quite right, into the plane of the paper. So because the R vector points this way, and if I use the right hand thumb rule, the fingers of the right hand curling from R to P will force the thumb to point into the plane of the paper. Yeah. Yeah, so L points into the board. Thank you. I think that is Milan Paul who told me that. Okay, so now in components, let us write out the components. You have, of course, done this in one of the early assignments. The components of angular momentum are 3. They are Lx, which is ypz minus zpy. I'm not going to rederive this. You have done it. But I'm just going to observe certain properties of it. And Ly which is ZPX minus XPZ, and LZ, which is XPY minus YPX. Now, just a comment about if you know LX, how will you write the formula for LY and LZ? Does anybody want to suggest how one might go about it? I'm just looking for a simple symmetry principle or some kind of mnemonic.
Sir, could you repeat your question?
My question is, suppose you know the formula for Lx, which I have written here. By what procedure will you find the formula for Ly? I want some simple trick.
Sir, cyclically.
Yeah, simply cyclic permutation. By that, I mean that I write X, Y, and Z here. I replace all occurrences of X with Y, all occurrences of Y with Z, and all occurrences of Z with X. Okay, so let us do precisely that. I drew my picture too far away. Let me bring my picture here. X to Y, Y to Z, and Z to X. If we do that here, X will become Y, Y becomes Z, and Z becomes X. So proceeding in this manner, you get the formula. That is a helpful way to write it down. Now, angular momentum is also called the moment of momentum. Okay, this R cross P is also called the moment of momentum. It's a somewhat old-fashioned name, but is used in by some authors. We will not use it very much. But it is nice to have in mind. Now, let us use Newton's force law, to compute the rate of change of angular momentum. Okay, and we will show that it's equal to the torque, which is also called the moment of the force. So let us see how this goes. Given L is equal to R cross P, I compute the time derivative. Yeah, and the time derivative, though these are vectors and there's a cross product, at the end of the day, it comes down to the Leibniz or product rule of differentiation. If I have a product of two quantities, I differentiate first one and then cross with the second, plus keep the first one fixed and time derivative of the second. So that is the formula. You can, of course, check this, write it out in components and differentiate one by one. Yeah, you can differentiate this expression more easily, perhaps, and combine all of them. You will find that this is the expression. So L dot is equal to R dot cross P plus R cross P dot. Okay. And that is by the Leibniz rule of differentiation. Yeah, but now applied to cross products as opposed to ordinary products. Now, R dot is momentum upon mass, of course, crossed with momentum itself. Fortunately, that is 0. P cross P is 0. So I can ignore the first term. And then R cross P dot is R cross the force. P dot is F. So thus we obtain the formula that L dot is equal to R cross F. Okay. So that quantity R cross F is called the torque. And by analogy with angular momentum being the moment of momentum, the torque is called the moment of the force, R cross F. But it is very important to always say that this is the torque about the same origin. The same origin about which L was defined. Yeah, so we have defined L with respect to certain origin. The torque is also defined with respect to the same origin because it's the same position vector that appears here. Yes.
So you said by analogy of Newton's law. Then this is just an analogy, right? It's not actually implied by the law.
Oh, wait. No, okay. I think if I misspoke, I would like to clarify myself. What I meant is that we are going to use Newton's force law to derive an equation of motion for angular momentum. That's all. There is no analogy here. I said analogy for a different purpose. For the naming purpose, I said that angular momentum is called the moment of momentum because it is R cross P. By analogy with that, torque is called the moment of the force because it is R cross F. That was the analogy. Is
Okay,
that
so but
okay?
we're going to derive angular momentum from Newton's law, right?
No. We define angular momentum through inspiration.
then
We
that
derive an equation of motion for angular momentum from Newton's law.
okay.
Yeah. There is no analogy here as far as the derivation is concerned. It is a straightforward use of Newton's second law to derive an equation of motion for L. That is all. Yeah. Yes. Okay. I mean, if there is an analogy, the analogy is perhaps what you would like to look at is P dot equal to F, that is Newton's second law, for linear momentum. Similarly, L dot equal to tau. Yeah. So these two laws look similar. So in that sense, they are analogous, but the second is a deduction. Yeah, this implies the other one. Yeah, so there is an analogy. In this sense, there is an analogy. The two equations look very similar. This is a rotational version. That is a linear momentum version. This is a rotational momentum version or angular momentum version, but one is implied by the other. So is that okay, Romit?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, fine. All right. Now let us. Any other question about this formula? Yeah. Okay. Now, a particularly interesting and important example of a force is a central force. By that we mean, one can say this in different ways. We mean a force which points radially along the line from the origin to the particle. Okay, so we have some notion of an origin. I mean, here I have defined it for some external force. You have a particle moving somewhere. It feels some external force, and suppose that force points radially from a certain origin. Okay, then we will call that force a central force. So of course it could point towards that origin or away from the origin. Both are called central. But it points along the line from that origin to the particle, no matter where the particle is. This must be true no matter where the particle is. Yeah. Now that is for a central external force. We can also have interparticle forces, which we will call central. Newton's gravitational force between point masses, as well as Coulomb's electrostatic force between point charges, are both central forces, in the sense that they always point from one particle to the other. Okay, so that if you choose one of the particles as your origin, so you have one mass and another mass. Yeah, so the force always points. I mean, if it is gravity, the force due to M1 on M2 is always along the line joining the two. Yeah, so if we choose our origin as the location of M1, then no matter where M2 is, the force will always point radially inwards in this case. Yeah, so this is called a central force. I mean, this is true even if M1 itself moves around. Okay, and the same applies also to the electrostatic force given by Coulomb. Now, the torque due to a central force about the force center. Yeah, so we choose the origin to be the location of the force center. Suppose we choose that origin, then, and we compute angular momentum about that origin and also the torque due to that central force about that origin, then one will see that the torque due to a central force about that force center vanishes, since in that case R and F are collinear. Yeah, so if this is the force center and this is my particle, maybe of mass m, and then suppose it is some other mass here, Newton's gravitational force always points radially inward and the position vector points radially outward. So R cross F is 0. They are collinear. They may point opposite, but they are still, cross product is still 0. Thus, we conclude that the angular momentum
of a particle moving in a central force field is independent of time because L dot was equal to tau. So this is 0 for central force field. So this is a pleasant feature of central forces. Angular momentum in a central force field is conserved. We will see certain important consequences of this later on. For now, I want to give a different example. Let us consider a projectile moving under the vertical gravitational force. We have a plane. Yeah, I mean the plane of this room. And we have downward pointing gravity. Yeah. Since the force is downward, the torque due to this force, say about this origin, has some special features. Because the torque is equal to the force, R cross F, and F is vertical. By F, I mean gravity. Gravity is vertical. The torque is perpendicular to F. And therefore, the torque must be horizontal. Yeah. In particular, yeah, I hope it's clear. If the force points vertically downwards, the torque cannot have any vertical component. As a consequence, the vertical component of angular momentum must be conserved for a particle moving in a vertical gravitational field. Yeah. So it is not as though all components of the torque need be 0. If one component, maybe the vertical component is 0. So tau z in this case is 0. So that will imply that Lz dot is 0. That is, Lz is conserved. Lz is independent of time. Now let's look at the expression for Lz. By the way, any question about this? Okay. Just an elementary consequence of this. Lz is conserved, and therefore xpy minus ypx must be a constant in time along a trajectory. Now, for this particle moving in a vertical gravitational force field, px and py are also conserved, yeah, because the force is vertical. So the momentum in the horizontal directions must be conserved. So px and py conserved. Okay. So px and py are also conserved. Lz is also conserved. Yeah. So this equation becomes an equation for a straight line because these are all constants. Lz, px, py are all constants. So we conclude that the trajectory, namely x of t, y of t, z of t, this trajectory must be such that its projection on the horizontal plane is a straight line. Yeah. A straight line given by this formula. I mean, there's no big deal. We are just interpreting and making use of the conservation of vertical momentum and vertical angular momentum and horizontal linear momentum. Yeah, so whatever may be the trajectory of this projectile, its projection on the xy plane must be a straight line. This is what we have concluded. Of course, it's not a surprise to you. I think you have studied that one can show that the trajectory of a projectile is a parabola over the xy plane. So no wonder the projection onto a plane on the xy plane is straight line. Yeah, but you don't need to know that the trajectory is a parabola. Simply from conservation laws, you can already conclude this. Yeah, and that is the point I want to make, that the knowledge of conserved quantities allows you to clarify the nature of the trajectories. Yeah, so conserved quantities are useful. They are very useful. So that will be a slogan for us, and we will repeatedly exploit conserved quantities to understand various systems. So any question about this brief discussion of angular momentum in this example?
Sir, actually in school before deriving that it is a parabola, we begin by assuming that it's a plane that is vertical and has the velocity vector lies in that plane. But we proved it now.
Okay, thank you very
We
much. Yeah, yes, yes, Milan. Yeah, if in your derivation in school you assume that the trajectory lies in a vertical plane, that requires proof, and now we have proved it. Yeah, very nice observation. Any other comments? Okay. Yeah, it helps to know that the motion is restricted to a vertical plane. I mean, so that there are fewer equations to deal with. Then it becomes a sort of one-dimensional problem as opposed to three-dimensional. Okay. Now I want to introduce some new terminology, namely that of a dynamical variable. So what do we mean by a dynamical variable? Now, the components of position, namely x, y, z, components of linear momentum, namely px, py, pz, yeah, as well as the components of angular momentum we have just encountered. There's again three components here. Then we had this energy, which is a single function. All of these are interesting physical quantities associated with the dynamics of a particle. We are just given 10 examples, 3 position components, 3 momentum components, 3 angular momentum components, and 1 energy. These are all interesting quantities associated with the dynamics of a particle. Okay. They are examples of what we call dynamical variables. The context of quantum mechanics, or in a language that has been popularized by quantum mechanics, they are also called observables. They are quantities concerning the motion of a particle that can be observed. Yeah, that is all it means. Yeah. Properties that can be observed. Properties of the particle, of course. Of course, let me be a little bit more specific. So these are called dynamical variables. They are examples of dynamical variables. More generally, I mean, for instance, I should emphasize that the mass of the particle or charge is not a dynamical variable. Yeah. So by dynamical variable, we mean something at least that is not some constant parameter. Yeah, those things are not considered dynamical variables. We want something that can vary in time. So let us be a little bit more precise.
In general, in relativistic mechanics, we have also the mass varying. So in that case, can be considered as dynamical variables.
No, I want to emphatically say that the mass does not vary in relativistic mechanics. The rest mass of a particle is an absolute constant. It can be tabulated in books, full stop. The mass of a particle doesn't change with time. It is called the rest mass. It does not change. There is something else which some people call relativistic mass that depends on the velocity. That is not what I will call the mass of a particle.
So,
yeah.
So dynamical variables are reference frame dependent, right?
The value of a dynamical variable can depend on reference frame. Indeed, yes. The location or the position vector of a particle, the components of the position vector do depend on the reference frame. Indeed, you are right.
Yeah. So in that sense, relativistic mass is also dynamical variable.
Okay. In a sense, yeah. Okay. When I say mass of particle, I mean the rest mass
Rest
of the
mass.
electron. Yeah, I do not mean the relativistic mass as is sometimes talked about. But yes, if you want to look at the relativistic mass of a particle thought of as a function of its velocity, then yes, it is yeah, and the velocity is changing. Sure. Yeah, though I don't feel that that is a very helpful viewpoint. Yeah. Yeah, but yes, any as we are now going to say, in general, any function of position and momentum, or if you don't like momentum, you can take the velocity of the components of the position and momentum of a particle is called a dynamical variable. Okay. Yeah, so yes, what you said is acceptable, provided you bear in mind it's not the rest mass.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So. Okay, now, so once again, any function, any real valued function, more precisely, any function of the position and momentum of a particle is called a dynamical variable. Okay, so that's going to be our definition. So, for example, the potential function V of R is a dynamical variable, because it depends on the position of a particle. It happens not to depend on momentum, but that is just a coincidence. Yeah? So this is an example of a dynamical variable. It's also called an observable. So it's an observable. Yeah. Now, similarly, the components of position are themselves observables also. Yeah. X is a function of X. It's the identity function. Yeah. So X, Y, Z, these are all observables. These are all dynamical variables. Similarly, Px, Py, and Pz are all dynamical variables. We will say that X, Y, Z, Px, Py, Pz are the basic dynamical variables. Yeah, whereas things like potential energy or kinetic energy, the kinetic energy was half m v, or let me say, sorry, it is px squared by 2m, yeah, plus py squared by 2m plus pz squared by 2m. Yeah, this is also a dynamical variable, but it's not the basic one. It is constructed from the basic ones by squaring and adding and so on. And so that is also a dynamical variable. In general, dynamical variables change along the trajectory followed by the particle. Okay. So this is the concept of a dynamical variable. Energy is also a dynamical variable, very much so. So is angular momentum, Lx, yeah, was ypz minus zpy. This is a quadratic function of position and momentum components. Yeah, it's a special function. It's a quadratic function. Yeah, so that is yet another example of a dynamical variable. So generally, we will consider any smooth or sufficiently smooth function of position and momentum components to be a dynamical variable. Any question about this? Okay. Now, among dynamical variables, there are certain distinguished ones called conserved quantities. Of course, we have discussed many examples, and based on that, we are abstracting and making a definition.
Just question.
Yes.
If we know time in position vector in a time interval, then we can also get the velocity from that there. So in that case, why are we considering r vector and p vector as independent when mass is unchanged?
Yeah. So okay, you said something about masses. I didn't quite catch that.
No. I mean r vector is basically p vector is basically m into r dot. So when we know r dot r in some interval of time, so we can easily calculate p vector from there. So why are we considering separately?
So the answer to your question is in your own statement. You said if you know r for some interval of time. No. We are considering at one instant of time. At one instant of time, then at one instant of time, suppose you know the location, it tells you nothing about the velocity. So that is the point. Or to say it differently, to give initial conditions to Newton's evolution law, equation of motion, second law, we do need to know the initial location as well as velocity. You cannot do without the velocity. But you are right. If you knew the position over a time interval, then you can differentiate it and with respect to time and get the momentum or velocity. But that is not what we are addressing. So I hope Vijayan is satisfied with that. Okay. Now, conserved quantities are certain distinguished dynamical variables. Conserved quantities are distinguished dynamical variables that are constant along every trajectory. Okay, so this is a very strong condition. A conserved quantity is one which is constant along every trajectory for the system considered. This means that the value of a conserved quantity does not change as the system evolves. Okay. Let me say here, the value of a conserved quantity, what does it depend on? Can you tell me?
Initial condition.
Very right. The value of a conserved quantity depends on initial conditions and nothing else. Okay. Of course, it will depend on masses and force constants and so on, but those are regarded as parameters. All we are saying is that the value of a conserved quantity can differ from one trajectory to another trajectory, but the value will be determined by the initial conditions. So once you fix initial conditions, the values of conserved quantities are determined. The value of a conserved quantity may differ from trajectory to trajectory. For example, let us take a free particle moving in this room or on a plane or on a line. The energy is a conserved quantity for the free particle. But depending on how fast the particle started out, the value of the energy, which in this case is simply kinetic energy, will differ. So the value of energy in general differs from trajectory to trajectory, depending on how fast the particle is moving, in this case. Okay. So this is a general discussion of what we mean by conserved quantities. Any question about this? I'm going to illustrate it with an example. Okay. As we were saying, conserved quantities are useful. They are very useful. We already use it to show that the angular momentum, the trajectory of a projectile must lie in a vertical plane. That is one interesting geometric deduction that we have obtained using conserved quantities. Now let's look at a one-dimensional problem. Conserved quantities are useful because they help us solve or understand Newton's equation for the trajectory. Okay. Let us take an example of a system with 1 degree of freedom. That is a particle that is moving along the real line, x. So the particle moving along the line, we have 1 degree of freedom. Okay. Let us write down Newton's law. It would say that, and let us suppose furthermore that the force is conservative. So that mx double dot is equal to the force is equal to minus v prime of x. Because we assume that the force is conservative. Then integrating this equation of motion once, we arrive at the energy expression, which is conserved, half mx dot square plus v of x. Okay. So now we are then free to try to integrate this equation once again. See, the original intention is to solve Newton's equation of motion. Because the force was conservative, we could integrate it once, but it's still a second order equation, and integrating once reduces it to a first order equation because it involves now x dot. So integrating Newton's equation once using conservation of energy produces a first order equation. Yeah, first order in time derivatives. Now we can write x dot, solve for x dot, and that is easily done. We take E minus V is equal to half m x dot squared. So 2 upon m E minus V is equal to x dot squared. Yeah, and now we take the square root and you get plus or minus sign. So that's what I have written here. Dx dt is plus or minus square root of 2 upon m E minus V of x. Yeah, so we have taken all the derivatives to one side, and now we are ready to integrate for a second time. Namely, we divide by the square root and write it as dx by square root of 2 upon m E minus V of x, of course, is equal to, or plus or minus that, is equal to dt. Okay, this is called separation of variables. Yeah, x's on the left, t on the right. Okay, so this is called separation of variables, and now we can simply integrate both sides. From some initial time t naught to the desired time t, from some initial location x naught to wherever the particle is at time x, at time t. Okay. If we do that, I just write it symbolically here. If you integrate time dt, you will get t minus t naught is equal to plus or minus integral of this expression. So what have we done? Starting from Newton's second law, which is a second order ordinary differential equation, we have basically solved that equation. We have reduced it to an integration. We have reduced Newton's second law to the performance of one integral. Yeah. So in effect, we have, and in doing this, we have exploited the conservation of energy. That was the key point. Otherwise, the first step itself would not have worked. So in effect, we have solved Newton's second order equation of motion in 2 steps. The first step, the energy is the constant of integration in the first step. Yeah. So we should think of energy as a constant of integration for Newton's second law. And in the second step, the constant of integration is called x naught. Yeah, that was the initial location. So we have done this in a 2-step procedure. We have 2 constants of integration, namely E and x naught. Yeah, so the emphasis here is that the conservation of energy has helped us solve the equation of motion, or at least reduce it to quadrature, reduce it to integration. Any question about this procedure? Yeah, but I want to make a couple of comments about this formula because the answer is actually not so explicit, sadly. Our answer expresses time as a function of x. Yeah, t is equal to t naught plus or minus this integral. And x actually appears only one place, the upper limit of integration. These are all dummy variables x prime of integration.
So x0 is the constant of the second integration.
Precisely, yes. X0 is the constant of integration. Yeah.
Okay.
And E was the constant of integration the first time on. Yeah, that we did through integrating factors. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you remember that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So very good. Now we proceed to give some interpretation. I'm sorry.
That is a slightly pedantic, but isn't t0 plus the function of x0 the whole constant of integration?
No, we do not consider T0 as a constant of integration. See, when we say initial conditions, what we mean is the values at a particular time. So T0 is that time. So yeah, yeah, we don't, we call T0 as the initial time, X0 as the initial condition at that time. So this is the terminology. And energy is also a constant of integration. That is the energy at that time. Fortunately, that energy doesn't change with time, so it's the energy at any time. So we did not have to bother. But the initial time does play a role, but it is not called a constant of integration. I mean, insofar as, no, see, if you simply look at this as a differential equation in mathematics, you can call both x0 and t0 as constants of integration. We are absolutely right about that. But here we are making a physical distinction between the initial time and the values of dynamical variables at the initial time. Okay, so there is a big difference between viewing this purely as a differential equation and as a law of physics. So sorry, was that Milan Paul or who was asking?
That was me. That's all. That's Romit.
Oh, Romit. Yeah. So are you clear, Romit, that you are
Yes,
quite
yes,
right?
sir.
That okay, great. Okay, good. But that was a very good question. Yeah, purely as a mathematical differential equation, T0 is legitimately to be considered as a constant of integration. Okay, so just as a comment here, sadly, our answer expresses t as a function of x rather than x as a function of t. And we will need to invert. I mean, first of all, you have to perform this integral, which is rather challenging in most cases. Right, after all, you have some potential function here, you put it over there, who knows how to do this integral. Yeah. And having done that integral and evaluated at the limits, you are supposed to invert the formula and get x as a function of time. All right. So the problem has been reduced to quadrature, that is the performance of integration and the inversion of functions. Okay. So a lot remains, but at least we have reduced it to that. We don't have a differential equation left. We have integrations to perform and inversions to be performed. Yeah. Let me mention here the existence of a conserved energy helps us reduce the order of Newton's second law from second to first. Yeah, namely, we have reduced it to a first order equation of n x dot squared plus v of x, whereas Newton's second law was second order. So that is the value of having a conserved quantity. It may help you reduce the order of a differential equation, make it one less. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem completely. Even here, we have to do one more integration, and having done that, you have to do one inversion. All that is there, but still, this is a step forward. Okay, any question about this? Yeah, so I'm nearly out of time. I just want to give a couple of one small physical interpretation. Yeah, so notice that there is plus or minus sign. One may wonder what is the purpose of that or what is the physical significance. So the thing is that interestingly, there is often more than one trajectory with fixed energy and initial location at some time, t0. Yeah, corresponding to the two signs plus and minus. Okay. So fixing the energy and the initial location, unfortunately, does not fix the trajectory uniquely in general. Yeah. And one can see why this is the case pictorially, or if you can think physically directly, that is fine. This is to be expected because the specification of energy allows two possible values for the initial velocity in general. Okay, I mean, that is simply because energy is quadratic in velocities. So if you specify the initial location, then V gets fixed. If you specify the initial time and the initial energy, yeah, the initial velocity still is allows for two possibilities. V naught could be either plus square root of 2 upon m e minus v or minus square root. Okay, so there we are. Specification of initial location and velocity uniquely determines the trajectory, but here specification of initial location and energy does not uniquely determine the trajectory, because velocity can have two possible values, at least in one dimension. Yeah. Yes.
T minus T not equal to plus minus, but that should always be plus, right? Like initial, it cannot be like before initial time. So physically.
Oh. And no. I am
T minus
not.
T not is always positive.
No, wait. No, that is okay. See, I mean, there is something to what you're saying. Are you looking at the forward evolution or backward evolution? There is something to that. But okay, the point I wish to make is somewhat different here. You have implicitly assumed that this integral is positive. That is an incorrect assumption, that this integral is positive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my T minus T naught could be mod value of this. I mean, that is mod value of this integral. Doesn't matter about the sign. So, like, it should always be greater than 0. So greater than equal to 0.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Maybe let me try to explain it in a different way as to what the meaning of these two signs are. By the way, we are not obliged to consider only the forward time evolution. We are also free to study the evolution backwards in time. That is also of much interest. Yeah. But okay.
In that case, then velocity would have to be, and this.
Yeah, but no, I think quite aside from whether we want to study forward time evolution or backward time evolution, I do want to emphasize that giving the energy and the initial location does not uniquely fix the velocity. I think that is something we do need to accept. Yeah. So, but somebody else had a comment.
Yes, sir. It was just that if x is actually less than x naught, or if x naught minus x is greater than 0, then this like t minus t0 will still be positive. But
yeah, correct.
Like, because if the velocity is negative anyway, like the position, right, is like the next position, right, will be less than the current position.
Correct. Yeah, x may proceed to the right or to the left. We do not know. In fact, both options may be present depending on the initial velocity. Yeah, but wait. So I think the issue of this sign I would like to discuss once again also. Perhaps I will do that next time. But for now, I do want to just conclude by saying that the two signs have to do whether the particle with that energy is moving to the right or moving to the left initially. Yeah, and both of these concern forward time evolution. Yeah, let's just think physically. Perhaps a picture will be helpful. Let's look at this picture. We have a particle moving on this line, the x-axis. Now it starts at some location and it is subject to a certain force which is given by the gradient of some potential. Okay. Suppose the particle begins over here, namely at this location x, and you are told that the particle has some energy, which I draw with this horizontal line. Now, given that the particle begins here and it has some energy, its initial potential energy is fixed. Yeah, that is given by V of this location. However, its kinetic energy is not 0 because that is not equal to the total energy. The potential energy is only so much, the total energy was so much. So the difference has to be the kinetic energy. Now that kinetic energy is due to its motion, its initial velocity. That initial velocity could be rightward directed or leftward directed, leading to two possible trajectories for a particle with the same energy and initial location. Okay? And the two trajectories you get that way are related to that plus or minus sign. Yeah, I think an example will help to clarify that both the signs relate to positive time evolution. Both the signs can relate to positive time evolution. I will try to clarify this further next time, but I hope the picture clarifies the physics. If you begin here, you could move to the right or move to the left with the same energy. Is at least the physical picture clear? The formula may be a little bit mysterious. Okay. Yeah, anyway, we will go over this briefly next time. I'm somewhat out of time right now. Yeah, but any other questions about this? Or about other things we have discussed today? Okay, if not, let us then stop over here and meet next on Tuesday. Any other comments? Okay. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and please stay safe. We will meet next on Tuesday. Okay, have a good afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
you're welcome.